trying to fight me, yeah? Back at home with your wife. Just celebrate.
When Mario Sperry got tapped out by that badass Russian dude.
Who was the badass Russian dude?
The Russian dude was the same guy that Frank Shamrock KO'd with a slam. I'm trying to remember.
Amar Suluev?
He opened up a gym.
Wearing Russian gear together. We see those in the files. But then you had this email right here, September 11th, 2011. And this is from an unidentified account to Jeffrey Epstein. It's referencing someone named Igor, and Igor who has close connections with Putin. And here's what this person said to Jeffrey Epstein. Spoke with Igor. He said last time you were in Palm Beach, you told him you had an appointment with Putin on September 16th and that he could go ahead and book his ticket to Russia to arrive a few days before you. He also looked into security in Sochi for you. He said regardless, he will still need to go to Russia tomorrow to sort out his Russian passport, which expires the end of September. So he will still fly back to New York on the 19th. He will be happy to go back to Russia with you on September 26th if you go.
Google Frank Shamrock's mixed martial arts record. Because Frank Shamrock slammed this dude and KO'd him. And this guy was famous for having beaten Mario Sperry in the old school, what was it called? Battlecade?
I don't remember. I remember Extreme Fighting.
Extreme Fighting, that's what it was. Extreme Fighting Battlecade.
That was where
John Peretti's organization.
That was where Conan fought Maurice Smith.
So here it is. Where are we at here? Go back a little low. Hold on. Stop. Igor Zinoviev. That's who it was.
Igor Zinoviev.
Remember Igor Zinoviev? He was a beast.
Yes.
Dangerous guy. Well, Igor had cut Mario Sperry open. He had a big ass gash in his forehead, and Mario wound up tapping. But Igor Zinoviev was I think he was a Sambo guy.
Yeah, I remember that guy.
Tough motherfucker.
Yeah. There were some scary dudes that passed through the UFC a while back. I remember there were two. There were from the Red Devils. There was Andrei Semenov and Amar Suluev.
Whoa! Wait a minute.
He was Jeffrey Epstein.
Igor Zinoviev was Jeffrey Epstein's security guard? No fucking way. That's right. Oh my God. Look at his face. That's him. That's crazy, dude. That is crazy. Former MMA guy gives alarmingly cagey interview about working for Jeffrey Epstein. Click on that.
We've got all this shit to look forward to.
Alarmingly cagey interview. Who is this that's saying this? MMA-guy?
Deadspin.
Oh, it's Deadspin.
Deadspin, yeah.
Oh, so scroll down a little bit. Let me see what the fuck he has to say here. So that's crazy that we're talking about this guy just randomly. Wow. He said, one thing you told me, for instance, one thing you told me is he got a heads up when the authorities were going to come to his house the night before. He said, and then he says, listen, what you say is between you and me. Okay, let's leave this alone. But anyway, feel free to Google. Ladies and gentlemen, that's crazy.
We're rich, baby. Conor McGregor haters rich. Break out the red panties.
So it was an interesting one as we bring up Jeffrey Epstein's driver and Soviet Special Forces soldier Igor Zinoviev. Okay, why Igor? I thought this was a combat sports podcast, right? Well, it turns out that this guy fought in the UFC back in the early days, and he fought against Frank Shamrock. Not a lot is known about Zinoviev, but Miguel Iturrate was able to chime in and shed light for us on him and also mob ties MMA. Wait a second, there's no such thing as the mob, right?
Recently, and it hasn't been covered by the major news, but it came out that Jeffrey Epstein, this billionaire that suicided over the potential child molestation charges and stuff, used MMA veteran Igor Zinoviev as a bodyguard for several years.
You mean, wait a minute. So we've got the Russian Red Devil, Igor Zinoviev, who is military trained, that some would say was muscle for some of the, I don't know, underhanded dealings in Russia, the people that kind of did that.
Mafia?
Oh, I would never say that.
Oh, there's no such thing as the mob.
No. So essentially what you're telling me is a guy that's been aligned with some of the most powerful people in the world had Russian military trained mafia muscle as his bodyguard? Isn't that a little strange to you?
Well, I mean, look, I know nothing about these types of subjects, right? But
Wait. First off, that's not true. But go ahead.
But I'm talking about high finance and international players and stuff like that. But if you go back about 10 years ago, there was, I forget what it was called, but there was like a whole. It had something to do with pizza, if I'm not mistaken. Like the name of the.
Yeah, I'm not even saying that name.
Theory and stuff like that. But the idea was high level pedophilia going on. Mm-hmm. And this is basically that coming back up with maybe a different name and stuff, and now more clarity and stuff like that. And all the questions that are coming up with Bill Clinton and Prince Albert and all that other stuff are really just a recycling of the same old theory and the same old conspiracy that's been out there for a long time.
Yeah. What's strange is the MMA tie to it. And one of the things that whenever you go to a foreign country and you're dealing with a large mixed martial art promotion, Miguel, you and I having traveled quite a bit, you have to assume that the people you're dealing with have some sort of underworld connection. And you could say, oh, that's a real broad statement. Well, not really. It's not in boxing and mixed martial arts. If you look at Pride Fighting Championship, which was the largest mixed martial art organization in the entire world at one point, they did an 80,000 seat venue and sold it out. So some would say it's probably the biggest, year to date. I don't think there's ever been an attendance larger than that anywhere in the world for a mixed martial art event. Mm-hmm. But they essentially went away after what we consider Time magazine in Japan did article after article after article just kind of showing their mafia ties, and it put that company under. It did. And if you look at everything that happened over there, whether it was fake fights or fixed fights, guys that in their contract would say there's no steroid testing at all, please take steroids. As well as, there's a lot of stories here that we talk a lot on this podcast about things that you can't find on the internet, which tends to be our core audience. It kind of brings the people, the dorks, to the forefront. There are things that I am well aware of that have happened in Japan that I won't talk about on this podcast because they're so bizarre.
Really?
Yeah, no, I won't do it. So, Miguel, have you ever dealt with anything in regards to mafia dealings with mixed martial arts, or perceived them as mafia dealings?
Well, like you said, mafia doesn't exist, right? So, the point is at certain points in time, it's not like, there's one big mafia boss that everyone answers to and there's an organization there or anything like that. No, but I think the strong man, the money man, the guy, the fanatic of the sport and our particular flavor of it that brings money to the sport because it's his passion and stuff like that, sometimes comes from, the underworld, so to speak. It's kind of been a tradition for, in boxing and things like that for, a long, long time. Some of them are legit, some not so legit, but they all, everyone likes to be associated with tough guys, right? So I think it strokes big egos to be associated with them, and you get that. Now with Igor, I think you have a very different pro. I think you have a guy who, I love when, somebody shoots somebody at Walmart and they say, oh, UFC fighter, and it's like the guy fought once in the UFC, It's like, I'm sure the UFC chafes at that, It's like Igor is the quintessential guy that you could call him an MMA fighter, but it's just something he did. You know what I mean? He came in there and he was good at it. He was, I'm not saying take away from his level or professionality or capabilities and stuff like that, but his skills came from, not 100% from training in the gym. He came from real life skills, and he came from, special forces in Afghanistan and stuff like that, where just a whole different way of life, for years and years, survival is part of his makeup. And another thing that guys like that, and this is the main thing, especially with an Eastern European guy, Epstein was paying him to be quiet. And that's it. You know what I mean? The guy, and still to this day, the guy's interview was like, I'm not saying anything. You know what I mean? It's like, I didn't see any girls. He's like, yeah, and he slipped in an interview 4 years ago and mentioned, yeah, they're kind of young or something. And they call him on it now, and he's like, no, you got the interview wrong. He's denying everything, and that's what it is. That's what those guys do. They're going to be quiet, and therefore, in my mind, we'll never know the true depths of the depravity. You know what I mean?
No, and a guy like him, I mean, let's put it in a proper context as well. He's been here 20 years, and
yeah.
Here, now. I'm going to show you the type of encyclopedic knowledge that a guy like Miguel Arante has here.
Ooh.
All right, so Miguel, do you know who brought Igor over here as a fighter initially?
Yeah, John Peretti.
Look at that, dude.
Nerd.
So John Peretti, for those of you who don't know, was the original matchmaker for the UFC, and he also matchmade a couple of the.
Let me pause you for 1 second and clean up a couple of things. There was an event in LA where Brock Lesnar made his debut that had over 100,000 people as official sales.
Hi, this is Kirby Sommers, and today we're going to be talking about J.E.'s bodyguard, who is Russian, and he also was sent by J.E. to do something with the CIA. And I don't know how many of you know this. However, what I want to share with you, and bear with me for a second because I have to open a book, is that when I began on this journey, I was very quickly approached by Bill Hamilton, the founder of Inslaw, who, of course, is the person from whom Robert Maxwell, who also was an intelligence asset for Russia, stole the Promise software with his handler, Rafi Eitan. And he and I, communicated quite a bit. And during one of his email inquiries to me, he wanted to know what I knew about J.E.'s connections to Russia. And so what I did at the time is I sent him a list, which I'm not going to cover in this podcast, but I will in a future podcast. I sent him a list of the contacts I knew that a J.E., who, by the way, I have to use his initials because sometimes on this platform, we don't know if it's going to be kept from you, if I'm going to be able to play this, or so in order to keep things safe, there are some names like the J.E. name that I have to use initials for, and other words that are deemed to be unfit on this platform, which I will have to use a substitute for. However, in Relentless Pursuit, a book by Bradley Edwards, who is one of the major attorneys for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, people that came forward. Not everyone came forward, but among them, Virginia. He wrote a book, and in it is a chapter called The Bodyguard. Now, on the screen, I have an image of the bodyguard, and he was a professional fighter, and he was also J.E.'s, he was the guy who made sure that he was protected at all times. So I'm going to read this, or at least as much of it as I can, from Bradley Edwards' book. On my trip home, I thought about a story that Sarah Ransom had shared with us when she explained that she was so desperate to escape, she attempted to swim off Epstein's island. She explained that Epstein's bodyguard witnessed the whole thing and would corroborate her story. When I returned, I called the bodyguard right away. He told me to meet him at Starbucks. This former bodyguard was a Russian mixed martial arts fighter hired by Epstein to provide security. With this type of background, I mistakenly assumed he was a cold-hearted, rough guy who protected whomever he was hired to protect and who would never share details. By all appearances, he truly seemed like a movie character who was meant to defend someone evil. The bodyguard seemed like someone whom Russian mobsters would hire, but he didn't sound like a bad guy when I called to set up our meeting. He had a secretive way about him, like a robot that was put on earth not to gossip about anyone or anything, but he wasn't the heartless character whom I had previously believed him to be. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't excited to meet me, but he had agreed to do so. When I got to the Starbucks that night, I was early as usual. It was nice out, so I picked a table outside. He had no idea who I was or what I looked like, even though we had crossed paths outside of depositions and meetings I'd had with Epstein several years before. He arrived within minutes, walked inside to grab a coffee, then looked around until our eyes met. He didn't hesitate before walking in my direction, knowing somehow that it was me. He didn't want me to take any notes. I put my pen down and prepared to listen. I asked him how he got started with Epstein and what he saw during his employment. He was hired initially because Epstein was worried that some girl's dad would try to unalive him. While I had never heard anyone say that Epstein had this fear, I had often wondered how it never happened. He continued to talk in a low voice, primarily on the subject of young females in Epstein's life. He confirmed what many others by this point had said, that Epstein's entire life, from the time he woke up to the time he went to sleep, revolved around young women. As soon as Jeffrey got out of jail in 2008, there were girls at his house all the time. The only thing that changed was the target age of his victims. They were all promised something that Jeffrey would do for them. And at some point, this bodyguard expressed concern to Jeffrey about his misleading them. He said, "You just got out of jail. You can't keep doing this with these girls." He made it clear that Epstein was engaging in the same conduct that landed him in trouble in the first place, but with a slightly older age group, focusing his attention not on rounding up high school kids, but on the modeling industry as his recruiting playground. These were girls who believed they were there wherever there was, at any given moment for a legitimate reason, not illicit S. But Jeffrey's purpose with them was S and only S. His bodyguard watched as dozens of young, aspiring models were lured into Epstein's world before being discarded, more broken than before. When this bodyguard told Epstein that he shouldn't keep doing this with the girls, he said Epstein responded, "Don't act like my grandma or you will be fired." Yes, he confirmed that Sarah tried to swim off the island, but her attempt showed no greater level of distress than he'd seen in other girls throughout the years. The rest of our meeting had little to do with girls and much to do with the danger he saw me putting myself in with Epstein. He was himself a real-life tough guy, yet I can tell he was frightened by Epstein, and he stressed that I should also be frightened. He had no precise information. It wasn't as if Epstein had told him I was a target. He simply made it clear that I was somebody Epstein had talked about, and not in a friendly way. But of course, I already knew that. As we got to know each other, he increased the seriousness of his voice. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I worked for him for years, and I still don't know who you're dealing with. He knows everybody who's powerful in this world. He went on to explain that Jeff's connections were not just to the local police, who were definitely in his pocket, and from whom, when he was in jail and on house arrest, he got so many favors. He elaborated that Epstein made very clear that the federal government would never prosecute him. He also snuck stories in to give me examples of how scary Epstein was. On one occasion, a lawyer was found at the bottom of a swimming pool. Epstein asked him if he thought people would believe it was self-unalivement, the S word, as if it wasn't, and suggested that Epstein, had something to do with the woman's demise. So it was a female attorney who was found at the bottom of a swimming pool, in case that was not clear. It wasn't someone I had ever heard of during my years of investigating Epstein, and so I had no reason to believe it was a connection to any case I was working on, but the purpose of the message was clear. He went on to tell me that when Epstein was in jail, he still had extraordinary power, even within our own government. The bodyguard had been sent by Epstein to Virginia to CIA headquarters. Nervously telling me the story, he said, "I don't know why I was there, but he told me they would take care of me. I attended a class for a week. At the beginning of the class, everyone had to introduce themselves. There were 45 people. 44 people were in the CIA or some other government unit with top secret clearance. I was the only private citizen. Everyone introduced themselves, and the instructor saved me for last. He did not let me introduce myself. Instead, he just introduced me as what he called a special operative. He explained that he then attended the class for a week before he was given a book with a personalized note and told to deliver it to Jeffrey. He took the book to Jeffrey's seldom occupied country jail and delivered it without reading the contents of the note. Anything else give you any other hints as to Epstein is? I asked. I can only tell you where we went and what I observed, but he goes out of his way not to share any real information. He spends most of his days doing what he does, hanging out with his girls, getting massages. The rest is traveling with very specific missions. Most don't last very long. The girls he trusts come along. He told me, I'm going to just read a little bit more. And I just want to very quickly kind of just look at my notes here. Okay. He told me, for instance, about a prince or sultan, he didn't recall which, whom they would meet all over the world. Listen to me carefully. He would meet this one person all over the world. So it was a prince or a sultan, but very likely this person was in fact the man formerly the prince, namely Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Okay, he just did not remember the name, meaning the bodyguard. And then he adds, Epstein also often met with Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel. Barak visited Epstein in New York as well, and on extended stays took residence at Epstein's 301 East 66th Street apartment. So then he goes on to talk about things that they don't really jump out at me for having to share with anyone. However, what I wanted to do is bring your attention to the fact that he did have a Russian bodyguard. It's really interesting that he doesn't name him. It's very interesting. He only refers to him, meaning Bradley Edwards, as the bodyguard. However, let me just pull up his name so that I can share that with you. Give me a second. Okay. So the name of his Russian bodyguard is Igor Zinoviev, and he was a UFC fighter turned professional bodyguard, again used by JE, as you can see by the image on the screen. So when I do another podcast about the Russian connections to JE, I will include the information I sent to Bill Hamilton many years ago now, because I haven't really heard many people talk about this side of it. And I am curious to hear from you guys if you heard about the Russian bodyguard and that he was sent by JE specifically to Langley, to Virginia, to the CIA. And because people are only talking about Mossad, they're not talking about Russia. They're not talking about CIA. But I'm curious to hear if you guys have heard, in fact, about CIA. With that, I'm going to bid you a good weekend. And
was not one of them I checked. Your boyfriend's in me,